The legal systems of medieval and early modern Europe were often as complex as they were harsh. While modern audiences might assume that justice was reserved for serious offenses, historical records reveal a surprising reality. Even the smallest transgressions could provoke extreme and peculiar punishments. These punishments were designed not only to discipline the offender but also to entertain, warn, and reinforce social norms for the wider community. They ranged from the bizarre and humorous to the cruel and humiliating, reflecting a society where law, morality, and spectacle were deeply intertwined. The rationale behind these strange punishments was multifaceted. First, the medieval justice system was fundamentally public and performative. Trials were community events, often held in the town square or near the local market. Citizens were expected to witness the administration of justice, reinforcing collective norms and deterring potential wrongdoers. A punishment, therefore, was never only for the offender. It served as a moral lesson and social theater. Second, law was closely linked with morality and religion. Many minor offenses were considered sinful or disruptive to the moral fabric of society, such as lying, drunkenness, petty theft, or disrespecting authority. Punishments often combined physical correction with public shaming to realign the individual with the ethical expectations of the community. Clergy frequently influenced legal proceedings, and religious doctrine could shape both the perception of wrongdoing and the methods of penance. Third, practical considerations dictated certain punishments. Resources for incarceration were limited, and the concept of rehabilitation, as understood today, was largely absent. Minor offenders were rarely sent to prison because space, food, and supervision were costly. Instead, authorities devised punishments that were inexpensive, socially effective, and sometimes innovative, making small crimes disproportionately memorable. Historical accounts of these punishments are both fascinating and disturbing. Consider the whipping post, a common fixture in town centers. Offenders of petty theft, public drunkenness, or verbal abuse might be bound to the post and whipped while the townspeople observed. The severity could vary according to local custom, the social status of the offender, and the nature of the crime. While whipping was physically painful, its humiliating visibility amplified its deterrent effect. Another striking example is the stocks and pillory, devices designed for immobilization and public embarrassment. The pillory restrained the head and hands, leaving the offender vulnerable to ridicule, verbal abuse, and projectiles such as rotten vegetables or mud. Stocks held the feet or hands, forcing the individual to endure discomfort and humiliation for extended periods. These devices were particularly effective for minor infractions, such as arguing in public, drunken behavior, or insulting neighbors. The physical discomfort was secondary to the social disgrace imposed on the offender. Medieval authorities also relied on ingenious mechanisms for punishments. Some towns employed cages suspended from walls or posts, leaving the offender exposed to weather and passersby. Others mandated unusual labor, carrying heavy objects, cleaning the streets in visible locations, or performing demeaning tasks for the local community. These punishments were often symbolic, turning everyday labor into a public act of contrition. Interestingly, humor and irony played a significant role. Some punishments were deliberately absurd, reflecting a cultural understanding that ridicule could be as corrective as pain. For instance, a man caught gossiping might be paraded through the streets wearing a sign or a fool's cap, while a thief of minor goods could be made to wear the stolen item as a visible mark of shame. These forms of punishment exploited the power of spectacle and ridicule, making minor offenses memorable for the entire community and deterring repetition. Legal records from various European towns reveal that children and women were not exempt from these measures. Minor misbehavior, petty theft, or disrespect could result in stocks, whipping, or public mockery. Authorities often adjusted punishments according to gender, age, and social status, balancing the need for deterrence with prevailing social hierarchies. In some cases, however, the punishments were so peculiar that modern readers struggle to comprehend their purpose beyond the obvious intent to shame or amuse the community. In addition to humiliation, financial penalties were common. Offenders might be fined for minor infractions, such as failing to maintain property boundaries, allowing animals to roam freely, or neglecting civic duties. These fines were often accompanied by public ceremonies in which the offender's misdeeds were announced aloud. The combination of economic loss and social embarrassment reinforced compliance with local laws while providing revenue for municipal authorities. Symbolic and ritualized punishments were also widespread. Some offenses required acts that were almost theatrical in nature, carrying a bridle and saddle as if being led like a horse, kneeling in front of the community for extended periods, or performing repetitive gestures designed to demonstrate submission and penitence. These rituals were deeply ingrained in the culture, blending the boundaries between law, religion, and community entertainment. One particularly intriguing aspect of minor crime punishment was the community's role in enforcement. Local citizens were often involved in identifying offenders, witnessing punishments, and participating in acts of public shaming. This communal aspect reinforced social cohesion while ensuring that justice was both visible and accountable. Offenders could rarely hide from the eyes of neighbors, creating a system in which social surveillance complemented formal legal authority. It is important to note that while many punishments might seem harsh or absurd to modern sensibilities, they were contextually rational. Medieval communities lacked centralized law enforcement, prisons, and standardized legal codes. Punishments needed to be immediate, inexpensive, and effective in preventing repetition. Humiliation, ridicule, labor, and minor corporal punishment achieved these goals efficiently. As we explore further in this series, we will encounter a wide spectrum of peculiar punishments, ranging from the almost whimsical to the outright bizarre. Some were designed for petty theft, others for minor insults, public misbehavior, or trivial negligence. Each punishment reflects the underlying social values, humor, and anxieties of the communities that employed them. In conclusion, the study of strange punishments for the smallest crimes reveals a society deeply invested in morality, spectacle, and communal enforcement. While modern readers may be shocked by the cruelty or absurdity, these practices were logical responses to the challenges of maintaining order and social norms in the medieval world. By examining these punishments, we gain insight into the priorities, fears, and cultural values of early European societies, and we begin to understand how justice, entertainment, and morality were intertwined in everyday life. In the next part, we will explore humiliating costumes and public parades as punishment, examining how towns used ridicule and absurdity to correct minor infractions. In medieval and early modern Europe, one of the most common and psychologically impactful punishments for minor offenses involved public humiliation through attire and processions. Authorities understood that ridicule could be as effective, or even more so, than physical pain in deterring misconduct. By forcing offenders to wear bizarre or degrading costumes and parade through the streets, communities ensured that minor transgressions became highly visible lessons for all. The fool's costume was a staple of this approach. Offenders accused of gossiping, lying, or other trivial misdeeds might be made to wear oversized, brightly colored garments, pointy hats, or mock crowns. Some were given bells or masks to draw attention to their condition. The visual absurdity instantly marked them as wrongdoers and elicited laughter or scorn from onlookers. This form of punishment capitalized on the human tendency to respond to humor and spectacle, creating a lasting memory of the misdeed. Animal-themed costumes were another popular device. People accused of behaving foolishly or stubbornly might be dressed as pigs, donkeys, or other animals, symbolically linking the offender's behavior with the traits of the creature. A man who had insulted neighbors could be dressed as a donkey and paraded through the village, reinforcing both social morals and symbolic meaning. These transformations were often exaggerated, complete with masks, tails, and props, intensifying the comedic yet humiliating effect. Processions through public spaces served to magnify the punishment. Offenders were sometimes led through marketplaces, churchyards, or main streets, exposing them to the judgment of the entire community. Children, neighbors, and travelers would watch, mock, and sometimes jeer, creating a social mechanism that extended the punishment far beyond the individual. Participation in these spectacles was often compulsory, and attempts to resist or hide were met with additional humiliation. Signboards and placards often accompanied the parade. A petty thief might carry a board describing their offense, while a quarrelsome individual could display a sign warning others of their misconduct. The combination of costume and textual explanation reinforced both the identity of the offender and the lesson for spectators. It was a highly effective method for public moral education, ensuring that the consequences of minor crimes were understood by all. Gender-specific variations existed in these practices. Women were sometimes forced to wear exaggerated headgear, mock veils, or dresses highlighting supposed vanity or impropriety. Men could be dressed as animals or fools to emphasize their misbehavior, such as laziness, gluttony, or minor theft. The costumes often reflected societal expectations of gender roles and decorum, with the ridicule tailored to both the offense and the social identity of the offender. Humiliating footwear or props were also used. Some offenders were made to wear oversized clogs, wooden shoes, or even shackles to exaggerate their awkwardness during public displays. Others were forced to carry heavy or symbolic items, like a broom to indicate servitude or a basket for cleaning, combining labor with public shame. These props reinforced the connection between the crime, the punishment, and the social lesson intended for onlookers. Religious or ceremonial parades added another dimension. Offenders might be processed during church festivals or on holy days, linking moral correction with spiritual instruction. Clergy sometimes participated, reading the offense aloud or offering prayers for the sinner, merging legal, moral, and religious authority in one public act. The combination of spectacle, ritual, and faith emphasized that the community and divine oversight were aligned against wrongdoing. Mock executions and theatrical punishments occasionally accompanied parades, while not physically harmful. These acts created intense psychological pressure. A person accused of minor theft might be led to a gibbet or scaffold, only to be released publicly after the performance. The drama instilled fear, reinforced the moral lesson, and enhanced communal memory of the offense. Integration with other punitive devices was common. Parades were frequently combined with stocks, pillories, or whipping posts. For example, an offender could be led to the pillory wearing a ridiculous costume, amplifying both physical discomfort and public humiliation. This combination created a multi-layered experience of shame, ensuring that the misbehavior was thoroughly discouraged. Humor as a tool for control was particularly effective. Laughter, mockery, and communal amusement were not merely incidental. They served to reinforce conformity to social norms. People remembered offenses when associated with absurdity, making ridicule an enduring deterrent. Authorities understood that humiliation could be strategically leveraged to maintain order, especially when resources for incarceration or corporal punishment were limited. Children and apprentices were often targeted with similar punishments. Minor misdeeds, such as skipping work, stealing small items, or lying, could result in parades with costumes or signs. The public nature of the punishment functioned as a form of early social education, teaching both the offender and their peers about acceptable behavior. International variations existed, with customs differing from town to town. In some German villages, offenders might wear large masks. In English towns, painted signs or wooden effigies might accompany the parade. In French villages, Costumes mimicking animals or exaggerated traits were used. Despite regional differences, the underlying principle remained the same. Public ridicule was an effective and memorable form of justice for minor crimes. In conclusion, humiliating costumes and public parades exemplify how medieval societies creatively addressed minor offenses. By combining visual absurdity, social exposure, and ritualized performance, these punishments leverage community dynamics, psychology, and symbolism to enforce compliance. The offender became both a lesson and a spectacle, ensuring that even the smallest crimes were met with memorable consequences. In the next part, we will explore the pillory stocks and other immobilizing devices, examining how public restraint served as punishment for petty crimes and social misbehavior. One of the most iconic forms of punishment for minor offenses in medieval Europe involved physical restraint in public, using devices such as the pillory stocks and other immobilizing contraptions. These instruments were designed not only to inflict discomfort but also to maximize public humiliation, serving as both a corrective measure for the offender and a spectacle for the community. Their widespread use underscores the importance medieval societies placed on visibility and social accountability in enforcing minor laws. The pillory was perhaps the most famous of these devices. Typically constructed from wood, it restrained the offender's head and hands, leaving them exposed in a central location, such as a town square or marketplace. The immobility forced the offender into an awkward, vulnerable position, while passers-by could insult, mock, or throw objects at them. Offenses punished by the pillory included petty theft, lying, drunkenness, insulting others, and failing to adhere to social or civic norms. The physical discomfort was only one aspect of the punishment. The psychological and social effects, embarrassment, fear, and the collective judgment of peers were equally significant. The stocks, another common device, restrained the feet, sometimes the hands as well, and were designed to make walking or moving impossible. Offenders could be left in this position for hours, sometimes facing adverse weather, flies, and other environmental discomforts. Stocks were often accompanied by public ridicule. Neighbors might jeer, throw rotten food, or chant insults. Minor offenses like leaving property untended, being rude to neighbors, or breaking curfew could result in a stint in the stocks. As with the pillory, community involvement amplified the punishment, turning personal misbehavior into a public spectacle. Variations and creative adaptations of these devices existed across Europe. Some towns constructed cages or enclosed booths that immobilized the entire body, while others employed wooden frames that forced extreme postures. In Germany, for example, offenders could be locked into small wooden crates, sometimes suspended from walls or poles, heightening both fear and humiliation. In England and France, elaborate designs included rotating devices that made the individual spin while restrained, further embarrassing the offender. The diversity of designs reflects a cultural fascination with novelty and spectacle in punishment. The sensory dimensions of the mobilization were carefully considered. Offenders were often exposed to loud noises, foul smells, and curious onlookers, creating a multi-sensory experience of shame. In some cases, objects such as rotten vegetables, mud, or even animal waste were thrown, adding physical disgust to social embarrassment. These punishments were deliberately designed to engage the community's attention, ensuring that the lesson of compliance was widely disseminated. Duration and severity varied depending on the offense, the offender's social status, and local customs. Some might be placed in stocks or pillories for an hour or two, while others could be left for an entire day or even overnight. Longer durations increased both physical suffering and psychological impact, emphasizing the seriousness of seemingly minor transgressions. Town authorities often scheduled these punishments during market days or festivals, maximizing audience exposure and reinforcing social norms through repeated observation. Combined punishments were not uncommon. An offender might first be paraded in a humiliating costume, then placed in the pillory, and finally whipped or fined. These layered punishments created a comprehensive deterrent system targeting the body, mind, and social reputation simultaneously. Such methods highlight the medieval understanding that correction required more than physical pain. It demanded public acknowledgement of wrongdoing. Gender and age considerations influenced the application of these devices. Women were sometimes restrained in modified stocks or pillories, often with additional emphasis on modesty or symbolic gestures reflecting societal expectations. Children and adolescents could face milder forms, such as short-term restraint or symbolic positioning, combined with verbal reprimand, ensuring that the punishment taught compliance without overly endangering the individual. Community participation was integral to the effectiveness of these punishments. Spectators were encouraged to engage with the spectacle, whether by observing, jeering, or even physically interacting with the offender. In some towns, it was customary to allow the crowd to add their own creative humiliations, such as tying feathers to the restrained person or applying harmless substances to their clothing. This communal involvement ensured that justice was socially reinforced and not confined solely to the authority of the magistrate or town officials. Moral and educational purposes were central to these punishments. By placing the offender in a highly visible, uncomfortable, and ridiculed position, authorities aimed to educate the public about the consequences of misbehavior. Children, neighbors, and visiting travelers witnessed the outcomes of transgressions firsthand, internalizing societal rules through observation. This system of public correction functioned as both deterrent and moral instruction, reinforcing communal cohesion and shared values. Symbolic elements were often incorporated. Signs, placards, or inscriptions detailing the offense might be attached to the device, allowing onlookers to understand the nature of the wrongdoing. Sometimes the offender was required to chant apologies or recite moral lessons aloud, enhancing the performative and didactic aspects of the punishment. These rituals emphasized that crime was not merely a private matter but a breach of social and moral order. Health risks and practical limitations were acknowledged, though rarely prioritized over public spectacle. Extended restraint could cause physical discomfort, sores, or even frostbite in cold weather. But authorities often balanced these risks with the desire to impress upon both the offender and the audience the consequences of misbehavior. Protective measures, such as straw bedding or partial shelter, were occasionally used to mitigate extreme harm while maintaining the punitive effect. Regional and cultural differences influenced the design and use of these devices. In some Dutch towns, elaborate rotating stocks were employed, while Italian cities favored decorative pillories and central piazzas. Despite these variations, the core principle remained: immobilization in public enforced accountability and reinforced societal norms. The enduring legacy of pillories and stocks lies in their combination of physical, social, and psychological elements. They were instruments of correction, humiliation, and deterrence, reflecting a society that viewed justice as a communal, visible, and memorable experience. Through these devices, minor crimes were rendered socially significant, demonstrating that even small transgressions could not escape public scrutiny. In conclusion, pillories, stocks, and other immobilizing devices illustrate the medieval emphasis on public visibility, humiliation, and community enforcement in dealing with petty offenses. By restraining the body and exposing the offender to ridicule, authorities effectively combined punishment, social education, and moral instruction, creating a multifaceted approach to minor crime. In the next part, we will explore the use of food, drink, and forced consumption as punishments, revealing how even everyday necessities were turned into instruments of correction and humiliation. In medieval Europe, authorities often used everyday necessities like food and drink as instruments of punishment, turning the basic sustenance of life into a medium for correction, humiliation, and deterrence. These punishments were particularly common for minor crimes and misbehavior, providing a form of correction that was inexpensive, visible, and socially instructive. The practice demonstrates how ordinary objects and routines could be repurposed into tools of justice, merging practicality with spectacle. Forced consumption was one of the most common methods. Offenders could be required to eat large quantities of unpleasant food, bitter herbs, or spoiled items as a form of public humiliation. For example, a petty thief or glutton might be compelled to consume bitter greens or salt-laden bread in front of the townspeople, turning the act of eating a normally pleasurable activity into a humiliating ordeal. The visual and sensory aspect of this punishment reinforced the lesson. Minor misdeeds were met with discomfort and ridicule. Overconsumption as punishment was also employed. Some towns forced offenders to eat excessive amounts of bread, gruel, or other staple foods until they were full to the point of discomfort. This practice symbolized the offender's gluttony, laziness, or greed, transforming a moral failing into a tangible, public experience. By exaggerating natural actions, authorities created a spectacle that entertained the community while reinforcing social norms. Spicy, sour, or bitter food was often used strategically. Offenders might be fed onions, vinegar-soaked bread, or other pungent items to cause discomfort, provoke facial expressions of disgust, and invite laughter from onlookers. These punishments were carefully designed to be memorable and socially humiliating rather than lethal, demonstrating the medieval focus on psychological impact as much as physical correction. Public feeding rituals sometimes involved ritualized repetition. Offenders might be required to consume the same unpleasant food multiple times or in a particular order, amplifying the discomfort and prolonging exposure to public ridicule. Town officials often staged these punishments during market days or festivals, maximizing the audience and the deterrent effect. The repetition also reinforced the moral lesson, ensuring that both the offender and the community remembered the consequences of minor crimes. Drinking punishments were also widespread. Individuals might be forced to swallow bitter potions, sour wine, or water laced with unpleasant substances. In some cases, offenders accused of lying, gossiping, or blasphemy were made to drink large quantities of ale or mead in a controlled but humiliating manner, symbolically cleansing them of moral impurity while entertaining the spectators. Forced drinking could also be paired with other punishments, such as parades, stocks, or public confessions, creating a layered experience of shame. Food as a symbol of moral failure was central to many of these punishments. Bread, meat, and other staples represented sustenance and virtue. Misusing or disrespecting them could be punished in symbolic ways. For instance, a man caught stealing bread might be made to carry a loaf publicly, display it as a sign of wrongdoing, or eat a particularly bitter loaf in front of the town. By linking the act to symbolic meaning, authorities reinforced social and moral norms through visible, tangible lessons. Children and apprentices were frequent targets of food-based punishments. Minor infractions, such as stealing pastries, refusing work, or disobeying masters, could result in forced consumption of unpalatable foods or drinks. These punishments were intended to instill obedience, respect, and social discipline early on, teaching young people about the consequences of misbehavior in ways that were memorable and immediate. Community participation amplified the effectiveness of these punishments. Neighbors, shopkeepers, and visitors often witnessed the acts, laughing or mocking the offender. Public observation transformed an ordinary act, eating or drinking, into a lesson in morality and social order. The combination of sensory discomfort, humiliation, and communal attention made these punishments particularly effective for minor crimes. Integration with other forms of punishment was common. A thief might be forced to eat bitter bread while wearing a humiliating costume and standing in the stocks, combining sensory, physical, and social correction. This multi-layered approach ensured that the offender experienced consequences on multiple levels, addressing both immediate discomfort and long-term social memory. Practical and symbolic purposes coexisted. Beyond humiliation, forced consumption could serve economic or logistical goals. Consuming spoiled or surplus food reduced waste while publicly demonstrating the authority of law. At the same time, the punishment provided a vivid moral lesson, connecting everyday sustenance to social behavior. Humor and irony were often employed. Offenders might be given food associated with the offense. Someone who hoarded butter could be forced to eat sour cream, or a greedy child could be fed excessive porridge, turning moral failings into visible, memorable spectacles. These punishments delighted the crowd while reinforcing communal norms and values. Duration and intensity varied by offense and local custom. Some punishments lasted minutes, others hours, but all emphasized public observation and social correction over physical severity. The focus was on shame, ridicule, and community participation rather than inflicting lasting harm. In conclusion, food and drink were powerful tools for punishing minor offenses in medieval Europe. By transforming necessary acts into mechanisms of humiliation, authorities leveraged sensory discomfort, symbolic meaning, and public spectacle to enforce social norms. These practices reflect a society in which law, morality, and entertainment were deeply intertwined, and where even the smallest crimes could result in creative, memorable, and socially instructive punishments. In the next part, we will examine water-based punishments, including dunking, cold immersion, and other aquatic methods used to correct minor misdeeds. In medieval Europe, water was not only a source of life but also a versatile instrument of punishment. For minor offenses, authorities frequently turned to various forms of water-based discipline, exploiting its physical and symbolic properties. Water could cool tempers, expose offenders to discomfort, and create public spectacle, making it an effective tool for correcting misbehavior while entertaining the community. Dunking and immersion were among the most common water punishments. Offenders accused of gossiping, scolding, or minor theft were often strapped into chairs, wooden frames, or cages, and repeatedly dunked into rivers, ponds, or large tubs. The sudden shock of cold water caused immediate physical discomfort, while the repeated immersion served as a rhythmic, highly visible form of correction. These punishments often took place in public areas, ensuring that the community witnessed both the offense and its consequences. The ducking stool became particularly notorious, primarily used for women accused of scolding, quarrelsomeness, or practicing minor witchcraft. The ducking stool involved seating the offender in a chair attached to a long lever, then lowering them into a river or pond. The spectacle served multiple purposes. It punished, humiliated, and entertained. In some regions, the process included several repetitions, each more dramatic than the last, heightening both the psychological and social impact. Cold water, as shock therapy, played a symbolic role. Sudden immersion was believed to cool the offender's heated temper or sinful impulses, aligning physical sensation with moral correction. In some towns, public opinion held that a good dunking could wash away verbal or moral misdeeds, making the offender temporarily a lesson in civility and restraint for the entire community. Water-based punishments were often combined with other humiliations. Offenders might be paraded to the river while wearing degrading costumes, signs describing their offense, or heavy weights. Once dunked, they could be subjected to verbal ridicule, thrown mud or refuse, or forced to repeat the punishment in front of a growing audience. The combination of physical shock, exposure, and public mockery created a multi-layered punishment that targeted body, mind, and reputation. Tanking or soaking as mild punishment was used for less severe infractions. Children or apprentices who misbehaved could be made to stand in shallow water, soak their feet, or have buckets of water poured over them. While these punishments were less dangerous than full immersion, they still caused discomfort and embarrassment, teaching obedience, and reinforcing social hierarchy without serious physical harm. Symbolic and moral dimensions of water-based punishment were widely recognized. Rivers, streams, and tubs were seen as purifying agents, capable of cleansing both body and character. Offenders were believed to leave the water not only wet and uncomfortable, but also morally refreshed or chastened. This blending of practical and symbolic function demonstrates how medieval societies linked physical experience to ethical instruction. Gendered applications were notable. Women faced ducking or immersion for gossiping, arguing publicly, or alleged witchcraft, while men might be dunked for quarrels, minor theft, or neglect of civic duties. Gendered expectations dictated both the method and intensity of punishment, reflecting societal norms surrounding propriety, authority, and behavior. Communal involvement enhanced the effectiveness of water punishments. Villagers often gathered to watch, laugh, and jeer, amplifying the psychological impact on the offender. Participation could include throwing water, mud, or refuse, creating a participatory spectacle that reinforced collective moral standards. The offender's humiliation became a shared experience, cementing the lesson in both their mind and the wider community. Seasonal and environmental considerations affected punishment. Cold winter water posed greater physical danger, requiring caution, while warmer summer water allowed for extended displays. Authorities adjusted methods according to the climate, location, and nature of the offense, demonstrating practical awareness alongside moral objectives. Public accountability was central. Offenders were usually exposed to high-traffic areas, marketplaces, or festival grounds, ensuring that the punishment was witnessed by as many as possible. This visibility reinforced a social lesson, making minor misbehavior a communal matter rather than a private one. The offender's discomfort became a warning, and their humiliation a deterrent to others. Integration with ritual and ceremony sometimes occurred. In some towns, dunking was accompanied by prayers, chants, or symbolic gestures, linking moral correction with religious practice. Offenders might be required to recite apologies or moral statements while in or near the water, reinforcing the notion that their misdeed was both socially and spiritually offensive. Duration and intensity varied. Some punishments lasted only a few moments, while others involved repeated immersion or prolonged standing in water. The psychological effects, fear, embarrassment, and anticipation of the dunk were often as significant as the physical discomfort, demonstrating a sophisticated understanding of human behavior in enforcing minor laws. Legacy and perception of water-based punishments reflect the medieval focus on visibility, communal involvement, and moral education. While the methods may appear extreme or cruel to modern sensibilities, they were contextually rational, inexpensive, performative, and socially reinforcing. By combining physical sensation, public spectacle, and symbolic meaning, communities created memorable lessons for offenders and observers alike. In conclusion, water-based punishments illustrate how medieval societies repurposed natural resources as instruments of correction. Dunking, immersion, and soaking merged discomfort, public exposure, and moral symbolism to address minor offenses effectively. The interplay of physical shock, communal scrutiny, and ethical instruction ensured that even the smallest misbehavior carried a visible and memorable consequence. In the next part, we will explore punishments involving minor physical pain and corporal correction, including whipping, caning, and other targeted techniques used for petty crimes. In medieval Europe, corporal punishment was a common method for addressing even minor offenses, demonstrating that physical pain could serve as both correction and deterrent. Unlike severe sentences reserved for serious crimes, these targeted punishments were designed to inflict temporary discomfort, create public spectacle, and reinforce social norms, often in combination with humiliation or ritualized procedures. Whipping and flogging were perhaps the most widely recognized forms of corporal punishment for minor infractions. Offenders could be bound to posts or kneeling platforms while receiving a measured number of lashes with a whip, rod, or switch. The severity was calibrated based on the offense, the individual's social status, and local custom. Common crimes punished in this manner included petty theft, public drunkenness, quarrelsomeness, or minor acts of disrespect toward authorities. While the lashes caused physical pain, the humiliation of public exposure often carried equal or greater weight in ensuring compliance. Caning or rod discipline was similarly employed, especially in domestic or educational settings. Apprentices, children, and servants could be lightly or moderately struck with rods for misbehavior, disobedience, or minor theft. In some towns, this practice extended to public spaces, where the offender was made to stand before neighbors while receiving lashes, creating a combination of physical correction and social accountability. The psychological impact of witnessing the offender in pain, coupled with the communal gaze, amplified the deterrent effect. Localized pain was sometimes applied strategically. Minor offenders might be struck on hands, buttocks, or shoulders rather than the back, focusing discomfort on areas that caused temporary distress without risking long-term injury. This approach reflected an awareness of proportionality, aiming to correct behavior without producing permanent damage. Pain was symbolic as well as physical, reinforcing the idea that transgression carried an immediate, tangible consequence. Integration with other punishments was common. Corporal punishment could be combined with stocks, pillories, humiliating costumes, or forced labor. For example, a man accused of brawling might be publicly whipped while wearing a sign detailing his offense, then locked in the stocks for a brief period. This layered approach ensured that correction addressed multiple dimensions: physical discomfort, social shame, and moral instruction. Gender and age distinctions were important. Men were more often subjected to whipping or caning in public, while women and children might receive lighter corporal punishment, often in combination with humiliation or domestic discipline. Social norms influenced both the method and intensity of pain, reflecting prevailing ideas about authority, propriety, and the protection of the vulnerable. Humiliation enhanced the effectiveness of pain. Corporal punishment was rarely administered in private. Townspeople, neighbors, and passers-by were encouraged to observe, jeer, and sometimes comment on the offense. The public nature of the punishment amplified its social and psychological effects, ensuring that the offender's misbehavior became a communal lesson. Ceremonial aspects often accompanied corporal punishment. Offenders could be required to kneel, recite apologies, or chant confessions before and after receiving lashes. These rituals reinforced the moral and social significance of the punishment, linking physical discomfort to ethical instruction and communal reinforcement. The combination of ritual and pain created a memorable experience that was intended to reshape behavior immediately and deter future misdeeds. Cultural variations influenced the choice and application of corporal punishment. In Germanic towns, carefully administered whipping was often ritualized with specific numbers of lashes, while English towns favored the combination of cane and public display. French communities might incorporate ceremonial gestures, prayers, or religious symbolism into the administration of punishment. Despite regional differences, the underlying principle remained: targeted physical pain served as a corrective tool for minor offenses. Psychological impact was central to the efficacy of corporal punishment. The anticipation of pain, the actual physical experience, and the public exposure combined to create a powerful deterrent. Offenders often experienced anxiety, embarrassment, and shame, reinforcing social norms in a way that words or fines alone could not achieve. The combination of bodily sensation and public spectacle created a lasting impression on both the offender and the community. Practical considerations also guided the use of corporal punishment. Authorities often lacked the resources for prolonged incarceration or elaborate correctional programs, making whipping or caning a cost-effective solution. Devices like whipping posts or rods could be used repeatedly with minimal preparation, while still achieving social and moral objectives. The efficiency of this approach contributed to its widespread adoption. Moral and educational dimensions were deeply embedded. Corporal punishment was framed not merely as retribution but as a corrective measure intended to align the offender with societal expectations. The visible, tangible experience of pain reinforced ethical lessons, emphasizing that even minor misbehavior carried consequences that were both immediate and socially acknowledged. Community involvement was essential. Public administration of corporal punishment ensured that neighbors, local officials, and peers witnessed both the offense and its consequences. This participation strengthened social cohesion and reinforced collective moral values, making punishment a shared responsibility rather than a private matter. Legacy of corporal punishment for minor crimes demonstrates the medieval emphasis on proportionality, visibility, and moral correction. While modern sensibilities may regard these methods as harsh, in context they represented practical, socially effective measures to maintain order, instill discipline, and educate both offender and community. In conclusion, whipping, caning, and other minor corporal punishments exemplify how medieval societies balanced physical correction, public spectacle, and moral instruction. By targeting discomfort while ensuring community engagement, these punishments addressed petty offenses with immediacy and visibility, making even the smallest crime a matter of public concern. In the next part, we will examine punishments involving minor labor and public service, where offenders were required to perform visible work as a corrective measure. In medieval Europe, authorities frequently used forced labor and public service as punishments for minor offenses, turning productive activity into a corrective and highly visible form of justice. These punishments served multiple purposes. They instilled discipline, humiliated the offender, contributed to communal needs, and provided a form of restitution or symbolic atonement. By combining practicality with social oversight, labor-based punishments became a common and effective tool for addressing petty crimes. Street cleaning and maintenance were among the most widely employed forms of labor punishment. Offenders might be compelled to sweep public squares, repair roads, or remove debris from marketplaces while onlookers observed. The work itself was physically demanding, but the public visibility was equally significant. Citizens witnessed both the offense and the punishment, reinforcing social norms and ensuring that the misbehavior was remembered. Minor crimes such as littering, negligence, or disorderly conduct often resulted in this type of corrective service. Carrying heavy loads or symbolic objects was another common method. Individuals guilty of small thefts, lying, or neglect of civic duty could be forced to transport burdens such as stones, water, firewood, or tools through the streets. Sometimes these loads were exaggerated in size or symbolic in nature, such as a sign listing the offense or the stolen item itself highlighting the link between crime and consequence. This approach combined physical discomfort with public shaming, demonstrating the offender's wrongdoing to the community. Agricultural labor occasionally served as punishment, especially in rural areas. Minor offenders could be required to work in the fields, tend livestock, or perform repetitive tasks like weeding or harvesting under supervision. This labor was often scheduled during market days or other public events to ensure visibility. The connection between physical work and correction emphasized both humility and restitution, aligning the offender's actions with societal expectations and communal productivity. Community service and repair tasks were also employed as corrective measures. Petty offenders might mend fences, clean communal buildings, or assist in construction projects. This form of punishment reinforced civic responsibility, providing tangible benefits to the town while simultaneously correcting behavior. Offenders were reminded of their duties to the community, and the public nature of the work underscored accountability. Symbolic labor was sometimes used for minor moral offenses. For example, a person guilty of gossiping, quarrelsomeness, or moral transgression could be forced to perform repetitive or demeaning tasks, such as drawing water from a well repeatedly, polishing tools, or carrying items in a ritualized manner. These tasks were designed not for practical utility but to humble the offender and create spectacle, turning work into moral instruction. Integration with public observation was central to labor-based punishment. Offenders often wore distinctive clothing signs or badges indicating their offense, while performing their assigned tasks in prominent locations. This ensured that the community could observe the consequences of misbehavior, combining productive work with visible correction and social education. The public dimension reinforced deterrence and social cohesion, turning minor infractions into communal lessons. Gender-specific practices were evident. Men were more often assigned physically demanding tasks, such as carrying stones or repairing roads, while women might be required to perform domestic or symbolic work in public spaces. Children and apprentices could be assigned age-appropriate chores, such as sweeping, carrying small loads, or assisting elders in communal tasks. These distinctions reflected societal norms regarding labor, gender roles, and proportional correction. Humiliation, as part of labor punishment, was frequently emphasized. Offenders might perform tasks while wearing mock costumes, signs describing their offenses, or symbolic items that highlighted the nature of their crime. For example, a gluttonous offender could carry large, emptied baskets representing food, or a liar might hold a board proclaiming their offense. By combining labor with ridicule, authorities maximized both physical correction and psychological impact. Duration and supervision varied according to local custom and the severity of the offense. Some tasks lasted a few hours, while others required multiple days of labor. Supervision was often provided by town officials, guild members, or community elders, ensuring that the punishment was executed correctly and witnessed by the public. The structured nature of the work reinforced discipline and social accountability. Economic and practical considerations also influenced labor-based punishments. Public works or maintenance tasks not only corrected offenders, but also provided tangible benefits to the community. Towns with limited resources could utilize minor laborers to maintain infrastructure, clean streets, or repair public buildings, effectively turning punishment into civic contribution. This combination of utility and correction reflected pragmatic governance alongside moral instruction. Psychological and moral effects were central to the approach. Labor punished the body through fatigue and discomfort, the mind through humiliation and public scrutiny, and the spirit through moral reflection. The integration of these dimensions reinforced the lessons of obedience, humility, and civic responsibility, ensuring that minor offenses were addressed comprehensively. Community reinforcement was critical. Onlookers not only observed but often participated in guiding, supervising, or commenting on the offender's labor. This engagement strengthened communal norms and created a collective experience of justice, making even trivial misbehavior a matter of public concern and moral education. In conclusion, labor and public service as punishment illustrate how medieval authorities combined physical work, public spectacle, and moral instruction to address minor crimes. By turning necessary tasks into corrective measures, communities achieved correction, deterrence, and social cohesion simultaneously. The offender's discomfort, exposure, and contribution to communal needs created a holistic method of discipline, ensuring that even the smallest infractions were met with meaningful and memorable consequences. In the next part, we will examine punishments involving symbolic animals and mock trials, exploring how allegorical devices and theatrical justice were employed to correct minor misbehavior. In medieval Europe, authorities occasionally turned to symbolism, theater, and allegory as tools for punishing minor offenses. By incorporating mock trials, animal symbolism, and theatrical performances, communities reinforced moral lessons while entertaining the public. These creative punishments reflected a society where law, morality, and spectacle were intertwined, and even trivial misbehavior could be transformed into memorable lessons. Mock trials were a popular method for correcting minor offenses, such as petty theft, gossip, drunkenness, or negligence. Offenders were sometimes brought before a fabricated court of townspeople or guild members, often in a humorous or exaggerated setting. They might be required to plead guilty, confess their misdeeds aloud, or respond to whimsical charges, creating a performative and didactic experience. The proceedings served both to chastise the offender and to educate the audience about proper behavior. Animal symbolism played a particularly vivid role. Offenders might be dressed as pigs, donkeys, or other creatures to reflect perceived moral failings, such as gluttony, stubbornness, or foolishness. A quarrelsome individual could be paraded wearing a donkey mask, while a gluttonous thief might be made to carry a piglet or other symbolic animal through the streets. These transformations connected moral behavior to physical representation, turning abstract faults into visible lessons. Mock trials often involved allegorical props and gestures. Offenders might be presented with symbolic items, a broom to indicate sweeping away lies, a wooden spoon to signify foolish consumption, or a hat shaped like a crown to parody arrogance. These props reinforced the nature of the offense while emphasizing the theatricality of the punishment. Townspeople watching the performance were both entertained and instructed, ensuring that the lesson was widely disseminated. Theatricality was central to the effectiveness of these punishments. Mock courts and symbolic parades were deliberately exaggerated, with officials or actors wearing costumes, masks, or robes to create a sense of spectacle. Offenders were often required to exaggerate their gestures, apologize dramatically, or recite moral statements aloud. The combination of performance, ridicule, and symbolism made even minor crimes socially significant and psychologically memorable. Animal allegory served multiple purposes. Beyond humiliation, it reinforced moral concepts. Associating a quarrelsome man with a donkey, for example, symbolized stubbornness and foolishness, linking behavior with widely recognized cultural tropes. Similarly, a deceitful woman might be paraded as a fox, invoking cunning and trickery. These symbolic punishments translated moral and social norms into tangible, visible forms, making abstract faults concrete and memorable. Community participation enhanced the impact. Spectators were encouraged to comment, jeer, or interact with the performance. Children, apprentices, and neighbors became active participants, reinforcing communal standards through observation and engagement. The offender's humiliation was magnified by public involvement, ensuring that the lesson extended beyond the individual to the wider society. Integration with other punitive methods was common. Mock trials and symbolic parades were often combined with stocks, pillories, forced labor, or corporal punishment. For instance, an offender might be paraded in an animal costume, brought before a mock court, and then subjected to a brief whipping or temporary restraint. These multifaceted approaches targeted physical, psychological, and social dimensions, creating a comprehensive corrective experience. Seasonal and festival contexts often influenced symbolic punishments. Some communities staged mock trials during holidays, fairs, or religious festivals, incorporating humor and celebration into the corrective process. Offenders were simultaneously punished and made part of a larger cultural performance, ensuring maximum visibility and memorability. Gender and age considerations shaped the choice of symbolism. Men were more likely to be associated with stubborn or aggressive animals, while women might be linked to cunning or moral failings. Children and apprentices were given less severe symbolic roles, often in the form of light-hearted theatrical exercises that instructed without causing physical harm. These distinctions reflected societal norms, expectations, and perceived vulnerabilities. Psychological effectiveness was substantial. The combination of costume, performance, public observation, and social ridicule created intense awareness of wrongdoing. Offenders were not only physically exposed but also psychologically affected, often internalizing the moral lesson through repeated public humiliation. The theatrical element made the offense and punishment memorable and socially instructive, reinforcing communal norms more effectively than words alone. Practical advantages included cost-effectiveness and versatility. Mock trials and symbolic parades required minimal material resources, but provided maximum social impact. They allowed authorities to address minor offenses without resorting to expensive incarceration or harsh corporal punishment, blending entertainment, morality, and justice in a single, accessible form. Legacy and cultural significance highlight the medieval emphasis on moral pedagogy, social visibility, and communal enforcement. By transforming minor offenses into performances, authorities ensured that justice was educational, memorable, and socially reinforced. These practices illustrate a society deeply invested in making even trivial misbehavior a matter of public concern, moral reflection, and communal engagement. In conclusion, symbolic animals and mock trials exemplify how medieval communities leveraged creativity, performance, and allegory to correct minor crimes. By combining humor, visual symbolism, public observation, and theatrical ritual, these punishments delivered moral instruction while reinforcing social cohesion. Even the smallest offenses became vivid lessons in ethics, order, and communal responsibility. In the next part, we will explore punishments for minor thefts and property offenses, examining how authorities used restitution, humiliation, and creative penalties to address everyday misdeeds. In medieval Europe, petty theft, damage to property, or minor trespassing were common offenses, and authorities developed a variety of punishments that combined restitution, public humiliation, and sometimes physical discomfort. The goal was not only to correct the offender but also to restore social order, compensate victims, and educate the community about the consequences of misbehavior. Restitution was central to these punishments. Offenders were often required to return stolen goods or compensate the victim with an equivalent item or monetary payment. In cases where the exact item could not be returned, townspeople might impose fines or require labor to make up for the loss. Restitution reinforced the principle that crime carried a cost and that social equilibrium needed to be restored. A petty thief caught stealing bread might be forced to bake additional loaves for the community or deliver goods publicly to demonstrate accountability. Public humiliation accompanied restitution to enhance the social lesson. Offenders might carry a sign describing their crime while returning stolen property or walking through the marketplace in distinctive clothing. Some towns required thieves to wear red or patched garments, hats shaped like stolen items, or masks exaggerating guilt. The combination of visual markers and the act of returning the stolen item created a performative correction, ensuring that the community witnessed both crime and accountability. Stocks and pillories were frequently used in cases of minor theft or property damage. Offenders could be restrained in these devices while holding a placard describing their offense, often in prominent public locations. Spectators were encouraged to mock or jeer, providing a psychological deterrent in addition to physical restraint. The integration of social pressure ensured that theft or property misbehavior was not merely a private matter, but a communal concern. Fines and fees were another common approach, often combined with public display. Offenders might be required to pay a sum to the victim, the town, or both. The payment could be made in full view of the community, turning the act of financial restitution into a publicly visible acknowledgement of wrongdoing. Sometimes the fine was symbolic, such as paying in small coins that required the offender to publicly count and hand them over, prolonging exposure and reinforcing the lesson. Creative or symbolic punishments were often employed to make minor theft memorable. For example, Someone stealing cheese might be paraded with a large wooden wheel, or a thief of poultry could be adorned with feathers. These punishments highlighted the offense and linked the crime directly with visual markers, creating a memorable spectacle that served as both punishment and moral instruction. Labor or community service could supplement restitution. An offender might repair fences, clean stables, or assist the victim with daily work. In addition to compensating for the property lost, the labor reinforced humility and civic responsibility, demonstrating that wrongdoing required tangible effort to atone. In some cases, towns combined labor with humiliation, such as parading the offender in a signboard costume while performing their assigned duties. Repeated offenses were met with escalated penalties. A first-time petty thief might receive restitution and a public warning, but a repeat offender could face stocks, whipping, or more elaborate humiliation. This graduated approach emphasized learning and deterrence while maintaining proportionality, showing that persistence in wrongdoing had increasingly severe consequences. Community involvement was essential. Neighbors, merchants, and visitors were often present during the punishment, ensuring the offender's behavior was publicly witnessed. The communal aspect strengthened moral education, as observers internalized the consequences of misbehavior through participation or observation. Mockery, laughter, and commentary helped cement social norms and served as informal reinforcement of law and order. Gender and age distinctions influenced enforcement. Men were typically subjected to more physically demanding public humiliation, while women might face symbolic or labor-based penalties. Children and apprentices often received milder forms of correction, such as public scolding, light labor, or symbolic restitution, ensuring the punishment was age-appropriate but still educational. Moral instruction and deterrence were key objectives. By combining restitution, visibility, and humiliation, medieval communities created punishments that educated both offender and public. The offender learned the consequences of theft, the victim received recognition and recompense, and the community reinforced shared norms of property, honesty, and accountability. Integration with ritual and ceremony enhanced the impact of punishment. Offenders might be required to kneel, apologize aloud, or perform symbolic acts in front of the community. These actions transformed correction into a ritualized experience, blending moral instruction with social spectacle. Practical and economic considerations underpinned these measures. Restitution and labor compensated victims and benefited the community, making punishments cost-effective and socially constructive. Meanwhile, the public aspect ensured that minor thefts were remembered and discouraged without resorting to severe corporal measures or long-term imprisonment. In conclusion, punishments for minor theft and property offenses illustrate the interconnectedness of restitution, public humiliation, and moral instruction in medieval Europe. By combining visible correction, social engagement, and practical restitution, communities ensured that petty misbehavior had meaningful, memorable, and socially sanctioned consequences. In the next part, we will explore punishments for minor moral and social offenses, such as lying, gossiping, or quarrelsomeness, and how medieval authorities addressed behavior that disrupted communal harmony. In medieval Europe, offenses were not limited to theft, damage, or physical misdeeds. Moral and social transgressions, lying, gossiping, quarreling, drunkenness, and minor acts of disrespect were considered equally important to regulate, as they disrupted community cohesion and undermined social norms. Authorities developed a wide range of punishments aimed at correcting behavior, humiliating offenders, and educating the public. Public confession and verbal correction were central to addressing moral offenses. Offenders might be required to stand in a marketplace or town square and publicly admit their misbehavior, often reciting a confession aloud. For example, a habitual liar could be instructed to declare the truth about a recent falsehood, while a gossiping individual might have to apologize publicly to those affected. These verbal acts reinforced personal accountability and made the moral lesson visible to the community. Humiliation was a key element. Those accused of quarrelsomeness, drunkenness, or insolence could be made to wear distinctive clothing, such as dunce caps, patched garments, or signs describing their offense. This visual marker communicated wrongdoing to neighbors, passersby, and visitors, turning minor misbehavior into a social spectacle. The combination of embarrassment and public exposure was designed to modify behavior by leveraging social pressure. Physical punishments for moral offenses were typically mild but deliberate. For example, a quarrelsome man might be lightly whipped, caned, or subjected to a brief stint in the stocks, reinforcing the correction through minor pain. Similarly, a disruptive individual might be forced to perform menial labor or community service, linking the misdeed with tangible effort and reinforcing humility. The goal was proportional correction, discomfort without lasting harm. Community involvement amplified the effectiveness. Villagers, neighbors, and officials often observed, commented, or even participated in minor acts of public ridicule. This communal engagement reinforced shared moral standards, as observers witnessed both the offense and its consequences. By integrating the audience into the corrective process, authorities ensured that moral education extended beyond the individual to the entire community. Ritualized performances and symbolic acts were frequently employed. Offenders could be required to carry symbolic objects, such as a broom for sweeping away gossip, or a board inscribed with their offense. These acts transformed abstract moral failings into concrete, visible lessons, combining physical action, public observation, and symbolic meaning. Mock trials, parades, and theatrical enactments were sometimes used to dramatize wrongdoing, particularly for repeated or notorious offenders. Repetition reinforced learning. Minor offenders might be required to perform confessions, symbolic acts, or public labor multiple times over days or weeks. This repetition heightened both psychological impact and communal memory, ensuring that the offender internalized the lesson and the community remained aware of the consequences of misbehavior. Gender and age distinctions influenced both method and severity. Women accused of gossiping or quarrelsomeness might be made to perform symbolic labor or wear humiliating attire, while men could face public scolding or light corporal punishment. Children and apprentices were often subject to lighter educational measures such as public apology, minor labor, or theatrical exercises designed to teach proper behavior without causing lasting harm. Alcohol-related offenses were treated with specific punishments. Drunkenness in public could result in standing in the stocks, being paraded with a sign stating the offense, or performing symbolic gestures that highlighted excess. In some towns, offenders were made to pour water over themselves or carry containers of water as a form of physical discomfort tied to moral correction. These punishments reminded both the offender and the community of the dangers of indulgence and disorder. Quarrels, insults, and disruptions of public order were addressed through a combination of public apology, symbolic gestures, and minor restraint. For example, a brawler might be required to kneel before offended parties, confess wrongdoing, and carry a sign stating the offense through the marketplace. The emphasis was on restoring social harmony, correcting behavior, and demonstrating the consequences of disrupting communal peace. Psychological impact was as important as physical measures. The fear of public exposure, ridicule, and repeated correction encouraged compliance and reinforced social norms. Authorities understood that moral correction required not only punishment but also social recognition of wrongdoing, ensuring that behavior aligned with community expectations. Integration with other punishments was common. An offender might combine public confession with labor, symbolic gestures, or brief corporal measures, creating a multidimensional experience of correction. This comprehensive approach addressed behavior physically, socially, and morally, reinforcing lessons across multiple dimensions: practical, and social considerations underpinned these measures. Minor moral offenses could undermine communal cohesion if left unaddressed. Punishments for such behaviors were cost-effective, visible, and socially constructive, ensuring that misbehavior was corrected while benefiting the community by reinforcing standards of conduct. In conclusion, punishments for moral and social offenses illustrate how medieval authorities maintained communal harmony through visibility, ritual, and symbolic correction. By combining verbal confession, public humiliation, symbolic acts, and minor labor, communities addressed petty misbehavior in ways that educated the offender, engaged observers, and reinforced social norms. Even seemingly trivial moral infractions were transformed into publicly instructive and socially meaningful events, ensuring order, cohesion, and accountability. In the next part, we will explore punishments for disobedience and defiance of authority, examining how medieval societies dealt with challenges to hierarchy and civic rules. In medieval Europe, disobedience toward authorities, be it civic officials, guild leaders, clergy, or household heads, was treated seriously, even when the offenses themselves seemed minor. Maintaining hierarchical order and respect for authority was central to social stability, and communities developed a range of punishments designed to correct defiance, instill obedience, and educate both the offender and the public. Public reprimands and scolding were among the first tools used against disobedience. Offenders might be summoned to town squares, guild halls, or churchyards to receive verbal admonishments from officials, sometimes amplified by ritual gestures or ceremonial reading of the offense. For example, a servant refusing duties or a citizen ignoring civic regulations could be publicly lectured while kneeling or standing in a designated spot, signaling both humility and acknowledgement of wrongdoing. The stocks and pillories were frequently employed to correct minor defiance. Those who resisted authority could be restrained in public for a fixed period, often with signs detailing the nature of their disobedience. While physically non-lethal, these devices subjected offenders to ridicule, jeering, and sometimes light physical discomfort such as exposure to the sun, rain, or cold. The visibility reinforced social hierarchies, demonstrating that defiance had tangible consequences and ensuring that the wider community internalized lessons about submission and respect. Symbolic gestures and costumes were commonly used to emphasize the moral lesson. Disobedient individuals might be made to wear pointed hat signs or patched garments identifying their offense. For example, a defiant apprentice could wear a sign stating, "I refused my master's command," while performing a minor labor task in public. By connecting visible markers to misbehavior, authorities transformed abstract acts of defiance into tangible and memorable spectacles. Labor as punishment for defiance served multiple purposes. Offenders could be assigned physically demanding or monotonous tasks in view of the public, cleaning streets, carrying water, or tending communal spaces, demonstrating that resistance to authority carried consequences both socially and physically. The combination of exertion and exposure reinforced the importance of obedience and respect for social hierarchies. Humiliation and ridicule amplified the corrective effect. Communities often participated in mocking disobedient individuals, sometimes throwing light objects, shouting, or making derisive remarks. Even small acts of resistance were treated as public lessons, emphasizing that challenges to authority were socially unacceptable. The psychological pressure of communal disapproval often worked as effectively as physical measures. Ceremonial and ritualized acts reinforced the moral and hierarchical dimension. Offenders might kneel before officials, recite apologies, or perform gestures of submission. In some towns, mock trials or theatrical enactments illustrated the consequences of defiance, providing a performative lesson that highlighted both social norms and the benefits of compliance. These rituals were particularly effective for offenses that could not easily be punished physically but required social and symbolic correction. Gender and age distinctions were evident. Men accused of defying civic or guild authority were often subjected to public labor, stocks, or symbolic gestures, while women could face parades or public admonishments appropriate to social norms. Children and apprentices received lighter corrections, such as verbal reprimands, minor labor, or symbolic acts, designed to teach obedience without causing lasting harm. These distinctions reflected both practical and cultural considerations. Graduated punishments were used for repeat offenders. First-time disobedience might result in public scolding or symbolic labor, while persistent defiance could escalate to stocks, corporal punishment, or combined penalties. This approach emphasized learning deterrence and proportionality, signaling to both the offender and the community that repeated challenges to authority carried increasingly serious consequences. Community involvement was crucial. Spectators witnessed punishment, participated in the ritual of correction, or ensured that offenders complied with instructions. Public engagement reinforced social hierarchies and norms, making disobedience a matter of communal concern rather than private conflict. Offenders learned that their actions were socially visible and that respect for authority was a shared expectation. Integration with other minor punishments such as fasting, temporary denial of privileges, or symbolic penances enhanced the effect. By combining multiple corrective methods, authorities addressed both behavior and morality, ensuring that defiance was corrected physically, psychologically, and socially. Practical considerations also guided the use of these punishments. Restraining offenders in public, assigning them labor, or parading them in symbolic garments required minimal resources but produced maximal social impact. Authorities could correct behavior efficiently while reinforcing the moral and hierarchical framework of the community. Psychological and social impact was central. Fear of public exposure, ridicule, and escalation encouraged compliance, while visible displays of authority reminded the community of social rules. Even minor acts of disobedience were treated seriously, reflecting a society where hierarchy and obedience were key to maintaining order. In conclusion, punishments for disobedience and defiance illustrate the medieval emphasis on public correction, social spectacle, and reinforcement of hierarchy. By combining verbal admonishment, labor, symbolic gestures, and public observation, communities ensured that minor acts of resistance were addressed effectively. These practices strengthened obedience, reaffirmed social norms, and turned even trivial challenges to authority into visible and memorable lessons for the entire community. In the next part, we will examine punishments for offenses related to public behavior and etiquette, including noise, manners, and minor breaches of civility. In medieval Europe, maintaining order and civility in public spaces was considered essential for the smooth functioning of towns, villages, and marketplaces. Minor breaches of etiquette or public behavior such as excessive noise, inappropriate dress, public quarrels, spitting, or failing to follow local customs were often punished through a combination of humiliation, labor, and symbolic measures. These punishments reinforced social norms and educated the offender while making the lessons visible to the community. Noise violations were commonly punished in towns where peace and quiet in public spaces were valued. Offenders could be forced to wear signs describing their offense or parade through marketplaces while making the noise themselves as a form of ironic punishment. For instance, a man who shouted insults might have to carry a placard reading "I disturb the peace" while repeating a single loud call to draw attention to his misbehavior. This method combined embarrassment with a moral lesson. The disruption caused by noise directly resulted in public exposure and ridicule. Improper dress or appearance could also lead to punishment. Individuals who flouted dress codes or displayed offensive or ostentatious clothing were sometimes required to wear corrective garments in public. For example, a man dressed in excessive finery might be forced to wear patched or marked clothing identifying him as vain or disrespectful. These visual punishments reinforced community expectations of modesty, propriety, and social conformity. making etiquette violations socially memorable. Minor public quarrels and disputes were often addressed with enforced mediation and visible correction. Offenders might be made to kneel, apologize, or publicly demonstrate reconciliation. In some cases, quarrelsome individuals were paraded through town wearing symbols of foolishness, such as donkey ears or dunce hats. The combination of humiliation and apology reinforced the importance of civility, showing that even verbal offenses had consequences in public spaces. Spitting, littering, and other minor breaches of hygiene were sometimes punished through public labor. Offenders could be assigned tasks such as sweeping streets, cleaning public buildings, or collecting refuse. This approach not only corrected behavior but also improved the community environment, turning punishment into practical civic contribution. The visibility of the labor emphasized social responsibility and moral accountability. Symbolic acts of correction were particularly effective. Offenders might carry exaggerated props, such as large brushes, buckets, or signs detailing their offense. A child who misbehaved in public might hold a broom labeled "I make messes" in the streets while performing cleaning duties. Adults might wear placards or symbolic clothing that communicated the nature of their breach. By linking action with meaning, authorities ensured that lessons in civility were concrete, visible, and memorable. Community participation was a crucial element. Neighbors, passers-by, and local officials were often present to observe, guide, or even mock offenders. Public engagement reinforced social norms and made misbehavior a collective concern. The offender's embarrassment was amplified by the presence and judgment of others, ensuring that civility was maintained through both social and moral pressure. Theatrical and performative punishments were sometimes used for repeated or notorious breaches of etiquette. Mock trials, parades, or public reenactments of the offense dramatized misbehavior, making the correction entertaining and memorable. For example, a habitual street brawler might be led through town in a symbolic costume, reenacting the disruptive behavior while performing corrective gestures. These spectacles combined humor, symbolism, and moral instruction, turning minor breaches into public lessons. Gender and age distinctions shaped enforcement. Women accused of public impropriety were often subjected to symbolic displays or verbal admonishment, while men could face labor, parading, or mild corporal measures. Children and apprentices received age-appropriate corrections, often in the form of symbolic gestures, light labor, or public apologies. These distinctions reflected social expectations and the need to balance correction with fairness. Repeated offenses were met with escalated consequences. A first violation might result in a verbal warning or symbolic gesture, while persistent misbehavior could lead to public labor, stocks, or theatrical humiliation. This graduated system emphasized learning deterrence and social accountability, ensuring that minor breaches were addressed proportionally. Psychological and social impact was central. The fear of public exposure, ridicule, and escalating punishment encouraged adherence to social norms. By making etiquette violations visible and socially consequential, authorities fostered both personal discipline and collective civility. The offender's discomfort served as a lesson not only to themselves but also to the observing community. Integration with other corrective measures such as labor, symbolic acts, or minor corporal punishment enhanced effectiveness. Offenders could be assigned work while displaying symbols of their offense or performing ritualized apologies, ensuring correction occurred across multiple dimensions: physical, social, and moral. In conclusion, punishments for public behavior and etiquette illustrate how medieval communities regulated minor misbehavior through visibility, symbolism, and practical correction. By combining labor, public exposure, symbolic gestures, and social engagement, authorities ensured that civility was maintained and that even trivial breaches had meaningful consequences. These measures reinforced community norms, educated offenders, and created memorable lessons in proper conduct for all members of society. In the next part, we will explore punishments related to minor religious offenses and violations of sacred norms, including irreverence, neglect of ritual, and minor sacrilege. In medieval Europe, religion played a central role in daily life, guiding moral behavior, social norms, and community structure. Even minor religious offenses such as irreverence in church, neglect of ritual duties, swearing during sacred times, or minor sacrilege were treated seriously. Punishments for these transgressions combined humiliation, penance, labor, and public correction, aiming to restore both moral and spiritual order while reinforcing communal reverence. Public penance was a common response. Offenders might be required to kneel in church, stand at the altar, or perform acts of contrition before the congregation. They could recite confessions aloud, acknowledge their offense, and vow to amend their behavior. The visibility of the act ensured that the community witnessed the moral correction, while also reinforcing the importance of obedience to religious norms. Humiliation and symbolic punishment were often used in tandem with penance. Individuals guilty of irreverence or disrespect might be made to wear specific garments, such as penitential robes, crosses, or placards describing the offense. A person caught swearing during Mass could be made to wear a sign stating their transgression while performing humble labor. These symbolic markers transformed abstract moral and spiritual faults into visible, socially instructive lessons. Labor and physical tasks were integrated as corrective measures. Offenders could be assigned duties such as cleaning the church, ringing bells, or maintaining sacred spaces. These tasks were not merely practical, they were imbued with symbolic significance, turning misbehavior into acts of service that restored both moral and communal order. The combination of labor, public exposure, and moral instruction reinforced the seriousness of religious conduct. Fines or contributions to the church were also imposed in certain cases. A minor sacrilege or desecration could require the offender to donate goods, money, or labor to support the church. This restitution served dual purposes. It compensated for the offense and reinforced the connection between wrongdoing and communal responsibility. The act of giving visibly signaled repentance and restored social and spiritual balance. Public correction and ritualized acts were crucial. Offenders might be led in processions, kneel in front of clergy, or perform symbolic gestures in sacred spaces. In some towns, minor sacrileges were addressed through mock rituals emphasizing the gravity of the offense and the need for repentance. These acts blended morality, theatricality, and public instruction, ensuring that even trivial religious infractions were taken seriously. Community observation and participation amplified the corrective effect. Congregants were encouraged to witness penance, comment on behavior, or ensure compliance with assigned tasks. By engaging the community, authorities reinforced collective responsibility for upholding religious norms, making offenses a matter of public concern rather than private error. Gender and age distinctions were evident. Men might perform physically demanding labor in service of the church, while women could be required to engage in symbolic acts, prayers, or other forms of visible contrition. Children and apprentices often received lighter educational corrections, such as reciting prayers, participating in communal rituals, or performing small acts of service, ensuring that punishment remained instructive without being excessively harsh. Repetition and escalation were common for chronic offenders. A first minor offense might result in verbal admonishment or a brief act of penance, while repeated violations could involve longer labor, public humiliation, or additional symbolic acts. This system emphasized learning accountability and proportionality, teaching offenders that persistence in irreverence carried increasingly serious consequences. Integration with other minor punishments such as public humiliation, symbolic gestures, or labor reinforced the lesson. Offenders might perform tasks while wearing signs, kneeling in public, or carrying symbolic objects, ensuring correction occurred across multiple dimensions: physical, social, and spiritual. This comprehensive approach reflected the medieval understanding that moral, social, and religious transgressions were interconnected. Psychological and moral impact was significant. The fear of public exposure, ridicule, and social disapproval encouraged adherence to religious norms, while visible acts of penance reminded the community of the sacred order. Offenders internalized moral lessons through both physical correction and public accountability, reinforcing the importance of respecting sacred spaces and practices. Practical and spiritual considerations guided these punishments. Offenders contributed to the upkeep of sacred spaces, demonstrated repentance, and reinforced communal and spiritual cohesion. The visibility of the punishment and the act of restitution ensured that minor religious offenses had both tangible and symbolic consequences, strengthening moral and spiritual order in the community. In conclusion, punishments for minor religious offenses demonstrate how medieval societies maintained sacred order through public penance, labor, symbolism, and communal observation. By transforming moral and spiritual misbehavior into visible, corrective acts, communities ensured that even trivial infractions reinforced social cohesion, respect for authority, and reverence for the sacred. In the next part, we will explore punishments related to food, drink, and consumption offenses, including overindulgence, gluttony, and misuse of communal resources. In medieval Europe, food and drink were not only vital for survival but also closely tied to social order, morality, and communal well-being. Minor offenses related to consumption such as gluttony, theft of communal provisions, drunkenness, or wasteful behavior were treated seriously. Punishments combined public humiliation, labor, symbolic acts, and restitution to correct behavior and reinforce social and moral norms. Gluttony and overindulgence were frequently addressed with visible correction. Individuals who ate excessively, especially in communal settings like guild halls, taverns, or religious feasts, could be required to perform humiliating tasks, such as standing in public with a placard reading "I ate too much" or carrying a symbolic, oversized loaf of bread. These measures emphasized moderation and communal responsibility, linking personal excess to public visibility and social accountability. Theft of food or drink from neighbors, markets, or communal stores was punished through restitution and public correction. Offenders often had to return stolen items or provide replacements, sometimes with added compensation, while being paraded publicly to ensure visibility. A person caught stealing ale might be made to carry barrels through the marketplace while wearing a sign describing the offense, combining physical labor, social humiliation, and restitution in a single corrective act. Wastefulness of communal resources, such as food or drink at feasts, markets, or church events, was similarly punished. Offenders could be assigned tasks that repaired the consequences of their behavior, such as cleaning, cooking, or delivering food to the needy. By transforming misuse into productive labor, communities reinforced the idea that carelessness or selfishness had tangible consequences. The corrective act not only educated the offender but also benefited the community. Drunkenness, particularly in public, was addressed with visible and often humorous punishments. Offenders could be paraded through streets, wearing symbolic items such as a bottle or tankard, or forced to perform menial tasks while under observation. In some towns, public sobriety exercises were enforced, requiring offenders to carry water, sweep streets, or kneel in public to restore a sense of order and responsibility. The public nature of these punishments served both as correction and deterrent. Symbolic acts enhanced the moral lesson. For instance, a glutton might carry an exaggerated spoon or plate in the marketplace, while a wasteful drinker might bear an emptied barrel labeled with their offense. These visible markers connected the behavior directly with the consequences, making the lesson clear not only to the offender but to the observing community. The physical, visual, and social dimensions combined to maximize the impact. Community participation was crucial in reinforcing norms. Neighbors, townspeople, and guild members often observed, commented, or even assisted in administering corrective measures. Their presence ensured that punishment had social weight, transforming personal misbehavior into a communal learning experience. Mockery, laughter, and supervision amplified the lesson and discouraged future offenses. Labor-based restitution often accompanied humiliation. Offenders could be required to clean kitchens, sweep marketplaces, assist in cooking, or distribute food to the poor. This approach addressed both the immediate consequences of the offense and the broader moral expectation of responsibility and care. By linking wrongdoing to corrective work, authorities ensured that even minor consumption offenses had tangible consequences. Gender and age distinctions influenced enforcement. Men were often subjected to labor and public display, while women could face symbolic acts or visible gestures of contrition. Children and apprentices might receive milder forms of correction, such as light labor, public apology, or symbolic props, teaching moderation and responsibility without excessive punishment. These distinctions balanced fairness, social norms, and practical considerations. Repeated offenses were met with escalating measures. A first act of gluttony or minor drunkenness might result in verbal admonishment or symbolic labor, while repeated misbehavior could involve public praise, prolonged labor, or multiple corrective acts. The goal was to ensure learning and deterrence, emphasizing that habitual misuse or excess carried increasingly serious consequences. Psychological and social effects were central. Fear of public exposure, ridicule, and repeated humiliation encouraged compliance with communal norms. The combination of physical labor, symbolic props, and social observation ensured that even minor indulgence or wastefulness carried memorable lessons, reinforcing moderation, responsibility, and respect for communal resources. Integration with other forms of punishment such as public confession, symbolic attire, or minor corporal measures enhanced effectiveness. Offenders experienced correction across multiple dimensions: moral, social, physical, and practical. This holistic approach reflected the medieval belief that misbehavior affected not just the individual but the broader community, and that correction should restore harmony in all aspects. In conclusion, punishments for food, drink, and consumption offenses illustrate how medieval communities combined restitution, labor, public exposure, and symbolism to address minor transgressions. By linking behavior directly to visible and socially meaningful consequences, authorities reinforced moderation, communal responsibility, and moral instruction. Even trivial misbehavior regarding food or drink became an opportunity for education, correction, and public moral reinforcement. In the next part, we will examine punishments for minor economic offenses, including fraud, cheating in markets, and underpayment of taxes or dues. In medieval Europe, economic life was tightly regulated by local authorities, guilds, and customary law. Minor financial offenses such as cheating in trade, shortchanging customers, underpaying taxes, or falsifying weights and measures were considered serious because they threatened trust, fairness, and communal prosperity. Punishments were designed to correct behavior, restore public confidence, and ensure the offender contributed restitution or labor while reinforcing moral and social norms. Public confession and apology were common first measures. Offenders could be required to acknowledge their wrongdoing in the marketplace, guild hall, or town square. For instance, a merchant who shortchanged customers might publicly admit the offense, declare the amount of discrepancy, and apologize to the community. This act not only restored the immediate economic loss, but also reinforced public trust and served as a visible moral lesson. Restitution was central to economic corrections. Cheaters and fraudsters were typically required to compensate their victims fully, often with added fines as a form of penalty. A baker who sold underweight loaves might have to provide additional bread to affected customers, or a merchant using falsified scales could be required to supply goods free of charge. Restitution restored the balance of fairness and ensured that wrongdoing had tangible consequences. Public humiliation enhanced accountability. Offenders might carry placards describing their offense, wear distinctive clothing, or be paraded through the marketplace. In some towns, a merchant guilty of underhanded dealings could wear a sign stating "I cheat my customers" while performing community service. These measures reinforced visibility, shame, and social responsibility, making the economic offense a lesson for both the individual and the community. Labor and corrective service were also common. Offenders might be assigned tasks such as repairing roads, cleaning public spaces, or assisting in market organization. The labor served dual purposes, compensating the community for lost trust or resources and teaching humility, diligence, and accountability. For example, a dishonest tradesman might sweep the market square while publicly displaying their offense, linking the act of correction directly to social visibility. Symbolic acts and props reinforce the lesson. Offenders could carry exaggerated weights, oversized coins, or symbolic representations of their offense while performing labor or public penance. These visual cues connected the crime to its correction, creating a tangible and memorable lesson for both the offender and onlookers. Community involvement played a crucial role. Citizens, guild members, and officials often observed or participated in the punishment, ensuring accountability and reinforcing collective values. Public scrutiny reminded the offender and the broader community that economic honesty was a shared expectation and violations had visible social consequences. Gender and age distinctions influenced enforcement. Men engaged in commerce were often subjected to public parades, labor, or visible signs of wrongdoing. Women might perform symbolic acts, labor in communal kitchens, or display placards describing minor economic transgressions. Children or apprentices typically received lighter educational corrections, such as supervised restitution or public apologies, emphasizing moral education rather than punitive severity. Repetition and escalation were employed for habitual offenders. A first-time underweight merchant might face restitution and public apology, while a repeat offender could experience prolonged public humiliation, labor, or additional fines. This graduated system emphasized learning deterrence and proportionality, ensuring persistent misconduct received increasingly serious consequences. Market-specific punishments were common, especially in towns where trade and commerce were essential to survival. Offenders who disrupted fair trade practices through false weights, price manipulation, or theft could be publicly displayed in the market, forced to correct their violations, and monitored by guild or civic officials. These practices reinforced economic integrity and the moral expectation of honesty in commerce. Psychological and social impact was critical. Fear of public ridicule, exposure, and escalating punishment encouraged compliance with economic norms. Offenders experienced both the shame of visibility and the practical consequences of restitution or labor, creating a comprehensive corrective environment that targeted moral, social, and economic behavior simultaneously. Integration with other minor punishments such as symbolic acts, public humiliation, or temporary restriction from market privileges enhanced effectiveness. Offenders could combine restitution with visible correction, ensuring that economic misbehavior was addressed across multiple dimensions: financial, social, and moral. This holistic approach reflected the medieval understanding that minor economic transgressions affected not just individual victims, but the trust and stability of the broader community. In conclusion, punishments for minor economic offenses demonstrate how medieval societies combined restitution, labor, public visibility, and symbolic correction to maintain fairness, trust, and communal integrity. By enforcing moral and social accountability alongside tangible compensation, communities ensured that even small economic misdeeds had meaningful, socially instructive consequences. Economic honesty was not merely a personal matter but a shared responsibility, and punishment was designed to restore order and reinforce communal norms. In the next part, we will examine punishments related to minor property and land disputes, including trespassing, unauthorized use, and negligent care of communal resources. In medieval Europe, property and land were central to economic stability, social hierarchy, and communal life. Even minor disputes over property boundaries, unauthorized use, or neglect of communal lands were treated seriously. Punishments aimed to restore rights, compensate affected parties, and reinforce respect for communal and private ownership. These measures often combined restitution, public humiliation, labor, and symbolic acts, ensuring that offenders were corrected while the community observed the consequences. Restitution and compensation were the primary corrective measures. Offenders might be required to repair fences, replace damaged property, or return encroached land to its rightful owner. For example, a villager who grazed livestock on a neighbor's field without permission might be required to rebuild a fence and provide additional fodder or produce as compensation. These measures restored balance and underscored the social expectation of respecting property rights. Public exposure and humiliation reinforced accountability. Offenders could be paraded through the village or market wearing placards describing their offense, such as "I trespassed on another's land" or "I neglected communal property." Some communities used symbolic attire, like patched clothing or distinctive hats, to mark the transgressor. Public observation served as both punishment and a moral lesson for the entire community. Labor-based correction was commonly applied. Offenders might be assigned work related to the offense, such as repairing damaged structures, tending communal lands, or assisting the property owner. For instance, a person guilty of over-harvesting from common fields could be required to perform several days of labor to restore the land. By tying punishment directly to the offense, authorities ensured that the consequences were both practical and morally instructive. Symbolic acts and props enhanced the visibility of correction. A trespasser might carry a wooden boundary marker, sweep the affected area, or wear a sign describing their violation while performing labor. These tangible symbols linked the offender's action with public acknowledgement and community instruction, transforming minor disputes into memorable lessons in responsibility and fairness. Community involvement was crucial for reinforcing norms. Neighbors and local officials often witnessed restitution, labor, or public humiliation, ensuring transparency and reinforcing collective accountability. Participation by community members emphasized that property and land disputes affected not just individuals, but the broader social fabric, and that collective observation and judgment were essential for maintaining order. Dispute resolution and ritualized correction were sometimes employed. Minor property conflicts could be addressed through formal hearings, mock trials, or symbolic ceremonies in which offenders acknowledged their wrongdoing, performed restitution, and publicly committed to respecting boundaries. Such rituals blended legal, social, and moral instruction, ensuring that both the offender and the wider community internalized the lessons. Gender and age distinctions influenced enforcement. Men who encroached on fields or neglected property were often assigned labor-intensive restitution, while women could perform symbolic labor or ritualized acts of apology. Children or apprentices involved in property disputes typically received lighter corrections, such as supervised restoration of the affected area, symbolic gestures, or public acknowledgement of wrongdoing. These distinctions balanced fairness, practicality, and social expectations. Repeated offenses prompted escalated measures. A first-time encroachment might require restitution and symbolic acknowledgement, while repeat violations could lead to prolonged labor, public humiliation, or community supervision. This graduated approach emphasized learning deterrence and proportional consequences, showing that persistent disrespect for property norms carried increasingly serious outcomes. Market and guild oversight sometimes reinforced correction. In towns, minor property and land disputes involving traders, craftsmen, or guild members could be addressed by guild authorities, combining financial restitution with symbolic acts or labor. Offenders might publicly declare their misdeeds, compensate affected parties, and participate in communal labor, ensuring compliance with economic and social standards. Psychological and social effects were central. The fear of public exposure, ridicule, and escalating consequences encouraged respect for property and communal norms. By making correction visible and socially sanctioned, communities fostered personal accountability and moral awareness, reinforcing the idea that misbehavior had real consequences beyond the immediate victim. Integration with other forms of correction, such as minor fines, symbolic acts, or temporary restrictions, enhanced effectiveness. Offenders experienced accountability across multiple dimensions: moral, social, practical, and economic. This holistic approach reflected the medieval understanding that property and land violations affected not just individuals, but community stability and trust. In conclusion, punishments for minor property and land disputes illustrate how medieval communities combined restitution, labor, public observation, and symbolic correction to maintain order. By restoring rights, educating offenders, and reinforcing social norms, authorities ensured that even small violations of property expectations were meaningful, instructive, and socially regulated. Respect for boundaries and communal resources was a cornerstone of medieval communal life, and punishment was carefully designed to protect both social and economic harmony. In the next part, we will explore punishments for minor offenses involving children, apprentices, and youth, examining how early correction and public education shaped behavior from a young age. In medieval Europe, children, apprentices, and young members of the community were considered malleable and in need of moral and social guidance. Even minor offenses such as disobedience, mischief, laziness, or minor theft were addressed through punishments designed not only to correct behavior but also to educate and instill discipline. These measures were carefully calibrated to balance correction with instruction, ensuring that youth learned the expectations of society while avoiding excessive harm. Public admonishment and verbal correction were central. Young offenders might be required to kneel before parents, masters, or community elders while admitting wrongdoing. They could recite apologies aloud, confess minor misdeeds in public, or read moral instructions as part of their correction. For instance, a child caught stealing from a neighbor might be made to acknowledge the offense in front of peers, emphasizing accountability and moral awareness. Symbolic punishments were widely employed. Offenders could wear distinctive clothing, such as patched garments, dunce caps, or signs stating the nature of the offense. These visible markers identified the misbehavior while communicating moral lessons to both the individual and the observing community. An apprentice who failed to complete assigned tasks might carry a sign stating, "I neglected my duties," combining correction with social instruction. Labor and corrective tasks were commonly assigned. Children and apprentices could be required to perform chores, assist elders, or help repair damages caused by their misbehavior. Tasks were often modest but instructive, linking wrongdoing to practical effort and responsibility. For example, a young villager who damaged communal property might help repair fences or clean public spaces, learning the consequences of negligence firsthand. Public exposure and communal supervision amplified the corrective effect. Peers, neighbors, and officials often observed the punishment, providing social pressure that reinforced behavioral norms. Mockery, guidance, and commentary from the community helped the offender internalize lessons about obedience, diligence, and respect for authority. The public aspect ensured that moral education extended beyond private discipline to collective awareness. Graduated measures were employed for repeated misbehavior. First-time minor offenses often resulted in verbal correction, light labor, or symbolic markers. Repeat offenses could escalate to longer periods of labor, more conspicuous public humiliation, or additional corrective tasks. This approach emphasized learning accountability and proportionality, making clear that persistent misbehavior was unacceptable. Integration with apprenticeship and household education ensured that correction was part of broader moral and vocational training. Young apprentices might combine labor, symbolic acts, and verbal acknowledgement of wrongdoing with ongoing instruction in trade skills, household management, or religious observance. This holistic approach reinforced both practical competency and moral discipline. Gender distinctions influenced the method of correction. Boys often received more physically demanding labor or public parading, while girls might perform symbolic acts, assist with household duties, or engage in ritualized apologies. The distinctions reflected contemporary expectations of gender roles, balancing punishment with socially prescribed responsibilities. Mock trials and performative lessons were occasionally used. In some towns or guilds, apprentices or youths guilty of misbehavior were subjected to mock tribunals, parades, or symbolic punishments that dramatized their wrongdoing. These acts were both entertaining and educational, transforming minor misdeeds into memorable communal lessons. Moral instruction and ritualized gestures were often combined with correction. Offenders could be required to kneel, make gestures of humility, recite prayers, or perform acts of service. These practices instilled respect for authority, empathy for affected parties, and awareness of social expectations, turning punishment into a multidimensional learning experience. Community involvement reinforced accountability. Parents, masters, guild members, and neighbors often participated in monitoring behavior, supervising labor, or ensuring compliance with symbolic gestures. This collective oversight taught youth that their actions had consequences beyond the individual level, reinforcing social cohesion and moral responsibility. Psychological impact and deterrence were important. Fear of public embarrassment, peer disapproval, and escalation encouraged adherence to communal norms. At the same time, corrective measures were carefully designed to educate rather than traumatize, ensuring that discipline promoted long-term moral development and social conformity. Integration with other punishments such as restitution, symbolic acts, or temporary restriction from privileges enhanced effectiveness. Youth experienced correction across multiple dimensions: moral, social, practical, and communal. This approach reflected the medieval belief that early intervention was critical to shaping responsible, productive, and morally aware adults. In conclusion, punishments for minor youth and apprentice offenses illustrate how medieval communities balanced correction, education, and public instruction. By combining verbal acknowledgement, symbolic markers, labor, and communal oversight, authorities ensured that even trivial misbehavior contributed to moral development, social responsibility, and lifelong learning. These measures emphasized that early correction was essential not just for individual growth but also for the cohesion and stability of the broader community. In the next part, we will examine punishments for minor offenses related to animals, including livestock mismanagement, theft, and nuisance caused by animals. In medieval Europe, animals were vital to everyday life. Livestock provided food, labor, and income, while pets or working animals played important social and economic roles. Even minor offenses involving animals, such as mismanagement, theft, negligence, or nuisance caused by livestock, were treated seriously, as they could threaten property, safety, and communal harmony. Punishments were designed to correct behavior, compensate victims, and reinforce responsibility, often combining restitution, labor, public humiliation, and symbolic acts. Theft of animals was a particularly serious minor offense, given the economic importance of livestock. Even petty theft of a sheep, pig, or chicken could result in public correction. Offenders might be required to return the stolen animal, pay additional restitution, and publicly admit wrongdoing in the marketplace or town square. In some cases, The offender was forced to carry the animal through town on a rope or lead it in front of the community, making their misdeed visible to neighbors and emphasizing the social consequences of theft. Negligence in animal care, such as failing to feed or properly secure livestock, was addressed through restitution and corrective labor. A villager whose cows wandered into a neighbor's crops might be required to repair damage, rebuild fences, or help with tending communal land. These measures linked action with accountability, teaching that responsible care of animals was essential for both property protection and community well-being. Animals causing public nuisance, such as livestock wandering streets, damaging gardens, or frightening passers-by, could result in public humiliation for the owner. Owners might be forced to parade their animals through the village while displaying signs describing the offense, or perform symbolic gestures of contrition such as kneeling, bowing, or assisting neighbors. By making the correction visible, communities reinforced responsibility for animals and the social consequences of mismanagement. Labor and restitution were common corrective measures. Offenders could be required to work in public spaces, repair fences, clean stables, or assist the aggrieved party. For instance, a child whose goat damaged a neighbor's garden might be assigned to tend the garden, sweep streets, or assist with communal chores. By tying correction to practical effort, authorities ensured that lessons were tangible, instructive, and directly linked to the offense. Symbolic acts and markers were also used. Offenders might carry a symbolic representation of the animal or the misdeed, such as a wooden sheep or a sign stating "I neglected my livestock," while performing labor or public penance. These props served as visual reminders of responsibility and moral accountability, enhancing the social impact of correction. Community oversight played a vital role. Neighbors, local officials, and passers-by often observed the punishment, ensuring that it was socially effective and publicly acknowledged. Community participation emphasized that animal-related offenses were not merely private matters, but issues affecting collective safety, property, and social harmony. Gender and age distinctions were evident. Men or adult caretakers were often subjected to more physically demanding labor or public exposure, while women could perform symbolic acts, assist in labor, or display visible signs of contrition. Children and apprentices typically received age-appropriate corrections, such as tending the animal under supervision, performing minor symbolic gestures, or making public apologies, emphasizing learning and accountability rather than excessive punishment. Repeated offenses were met with escalating measures. A first incident might involve restitution, symbolic gestures, or light labor, while repeated negligence, theft, or mismanagement could result in longer labor, more conspicuous public humiliation, or community supervision. This graduated approach reinforced lessons and discouraged habitual neglect or misconduct. Integration with other minor punishments such as public apology, symbolic attire, or temporary restriction from privileges enhanced effectiveness. Offenders experienced correction on multiple levels: moral, social, practical, and economic. By addressing behavior from several angles, authorities ensured that even minor animal-related offenses left lasting lessons on responsibility and community expectations. Psychological and social impact was central. Public humiliation, labor, and visible restitution instilled a sense of accountability and emphasized that minor negligence could have tangible consequences. Communities learned collectively about standards for animal care, while offenders internalized moral lessons through social visibility and practical correction. In conclusion, punishments for animal-related offenses illustrate how medieval societies combined restitution, labor, public exposure, and symbolic correction to maintain economic stability, social order, and communal responsibility. By teaching proper care, enforcing restitution, and using visible corrective measures, authorities ensured that even minor transgressions regarding animals were socially instructive, morally meaningful, and practically effective. In the next part, we will examine punishments for minor offenses involving hygiene, cleanliness, and sanitation, exploring how communities enforced standards of health and public decency. In medieval Europe, standards of hygiene and sanitation were deeply connected to public health, social order, and moral expectations. Even minor offenses such as littering streets, improper waste disposal, failing to clean public or private spaces, or neglecting personal hygiene in communal settings were treated seriously. Punishments were designed to correct behavior, protect community health, and reinforce social norms, often combining public humiliation, labor, symbolic gestures, and restitution. Public shaming and exposure were common tools. Offenders might be paraded through streets or marketplaces carrying signs describing their offense, such as "I dirty the streets" or "I neglect cleanliness." Sometimes they were made to carry buckets of water or brooms while performing their corrective labor. These public measures transformed minor sanitary misbehavior into visible lessons for the entire community, ensuring that everyone understood the consequences of negligence. Labor and restorative work were central to correcting hygiene offenses. Offenders could be required to clean streets, remove waste, repair communal latrines, or sweep marketplaces. Such tasks addressed the immediate problem while teaching responsibility, linking the act of correction directly to the offense. For example, a person caught dumping refuse into public spaces might spend several days clearing streets and communal drains, making their correction both practical and socially instructive. Symbolic acts and props reinforced moral lessons. Individuals could wear distinctive clothing or carry exaggerated cleaning tools to indicate their offense, making their misdeed immediately visible. A villager who neglected personal hygiene in communal baths might carry a sign or wear a marked garment while performing cleaning duties, turning personal negligence into a publicly acknowledged lesson. Community supervision and participation were crucial. Neighbors, officials, and passers-by often observed the correction, provided guidance, or even mocked offenders to reinforce social norms. This communal involvement emphasized that hygiene and sanitation were shared responsibilities, and minor offenses had implications beyond the individual. Public oversight ensured that correction was effective, socially sanctioned, and instructive. Gender and age distinctions influenced enforcement. Men were often assigned labor-intensive cleaning tasks, while women could perform symbolic gestures, assist in communal sanitation work, or wear signs identifying their offense. Children and apprentices typically received lighter, educational forms of correction, such as supervised cleaning, symbolic displays, or public apologies, emphasizing moral instruction over punishment. Graduated punishments were applied to repeat offenders. A first-time litterer or someone neglecting communal hygiene might face verbal reprimand or light labor. Persistent offenders could experience longer periods of labor, public humiliation, or multiple corrective acts. This system reinforced accountability, teaching that ongoing neglect carried increasingly serious consequences. Integration with other forms of correction, such as restitution, public apology, or symbolic acts, enhanced effectiveness. Offenders corrected the immediate problem while also participating in visible moral education, ensuring lessons were practical, social, and psychological. By linking minor sanitary misbehavior to public consequences, communities instilled long-term behavioral norms. Psychological and social effects were central to enforcement. Fear of public embarrassment, ridicule, and repeated correction encouraged compliance with communal hygiene standards. Observers internalized social norms, while offenders experienced moral and practical education through visible restitution and labor, reinforcing the value of cleanliness. Practical considerations also guided enforcement. Assigning corrective labor addressed both the problem and the punishment simultaneously, improving streets, public latrines, and communal spaces. Visible correction ensured the community witnessed accountability, reinforcing collective responsibility for public health and social order. In conclusion, punishments for hygiene and sanitation offenses illustrate how medieval communities combined labor, public exposure, symbolic gestures, and social oversight to maintain cleanliness, moral responsibility, and communal welfare. By making even minor breaches of hygiene socially visible and practically corrected, authorities ensured that personal and communal standards were upheld, contributing to health, order, and moral instruction across the population. In the next and final part, we will examine minor miscellaneous offenses and the overall philosophy of punishment, concluding the overview of the strangest and most instructive punishments in medieval communities. As we conclude our exploration of minor offenses and their punishments in medieval Europe, it is essential to consider the miscellaneous infractions that did not neatly fall into previous categories, as well as the overarching philosophy behind medieval punishment. These minor acts, ranging from playful mischief and breaking local superstitions to disobedience in public spaces, offer a window into how communities maintained order, morality, and social cohesion through creative, often bizarre corrective measures. Playful mischief and prank offenses were surprisingly common, particularly in towns and villages where young people engaged in harmless but disruptive activities. Acts such as throwing mud, ringing church bells at inappropriate times, or harmlessly frightening passers-by were punished through symbolic gestures, public humiliation, or labor. Offenders could be required to stand in the village square, carry a sign detailing their prank, or perform corrective tasks, like cleaning streets or assisting community members. This approach combined moral instruction with social visibility, ensuring that misbehavior had both practical and educational consequences. Breaking minor superstitions or local customs was treated as an offense against communal belief, even when no tangible harm occurred. For example, ignoring town-specific rituals, touching sacred objects disrespectfully, or failing to follow seasonal observances could lead to symbolic punishment or public admonishment. Offenders might wear signs or distinctive clothing identifying the misdeed, participate in ritualized acts of contrition, or perform service for religious or communal spaces. These measures reinforced social cohesion and respect for shared traditions. Disobedience in public spaces, such as ignoring curfews, disrupting markets, or entering restricted areas, was corrected using public labor, symbolic markers, and verbal correction. Individuals were often required to apologize publicly, perform tasks related to the offense, or visibly demonstrate compliance. For instance, someone entering a restricted guild workshop might sweep floors, carry materials, or publicly recite their acknowledgement of wrongdoing. This approach emphasized visibility, correction, and moral instruction. The philosophy behind medieval punishment was grounded in a combination of deterrence, moral instruction, communal responsibility, and symbolic correction. Even minor offenses were not treated lightly because small breaches could undermine social norms, communal harmony, or moral authority. By linking punishment to visibility, restitution, labor, and symbolism, communities created a system where learning, accountability, and social cohesion were inseparable. Public humiliation, for example, was not purely punitive. It served as a lesson for both the offender and the observers, reinforcing norms across the community. Restitution and labor were consistently central across offenses. Offenders not only acknowledged wrongdoing but actively contributed to correcting the consequences of their actions. Cleaning streets, repairing fences, assisting neighbors, or performing symbolic gestures transformed punishment into productive correction. These actions simultaneously restored order, educated the offender, and benefited the broader community. Symbolism and theatricality were equally important. From carrying oversized props to wearing distinctive clothing or participating in mock rituals, the visual and performative aspects of punishment ensured that lessons were memorable, understandable, and socially reinforced. Such measures amplified the moral, practical, and psychological impact of even minor infractions. Community involvement and observation were essential. Punishments were rarely private. Neighbors, guild members, and local officials participated in ensuring accountability. Public correction reinforced collective standards and reminded everyone that minor misbehavior had communal consequences. Through this approach, medieval justice integrated moral, social, and practical education, reinforcing cohesion and order. Graduated consequences ensured proportionality. A first offense often resulted in light correction, symbolic acts, or verbal admonishment, while repeat misbehavior led to labor, public humiliation, or more conspicuous restitution. This approach emphasized learning, deterrence, and fair treatment, showing that even minor infractions had escalating consequences if uncorrected. Psychological impact was a deliberate part of punishment. Fear of ridicule, social disapproval, and repeated correction encouraged compliance, while restorative labor and symbolic acts fostered internalization of communal norms. Offenders learned not only about the specific behavior but also about responsibility, respect, and moral conduct within the social framework. Integration across categories from property to hygiene, youth to animals reveals a consistent philosophy. Punishment was educational, socially visible, and corrective, rather than purely retributive. Even the smallest offense was treated as an opportunity to teach lessons about morality, civic responsibility, and communal norms. In conclusion, minor miscellaneous offenses and their punishments illustrate the creative, symbolic, and educational nature of medieval justice. From playful mischief to subtle breaches of social custom, authorities designed interventions that combined public visibility, labor, restitution, symbolic correction, and communal oversight. The overarching philosophy emphasized that even trivial misbehavior could disrupt social harmony, and that correction should educate, restore, and reinforce community cohesion. Through these 20 parts, we see a vivid picture of how medieval Europe regulated daily life. Minor offenses, whether humorous, mischievous, or practical, were met with punishments that were as inventive as they were instructive, reflecting a society deeply invested in moral education, communal responsibility, and social order.